All right, as usual, before we start, I'll just mention that you are more than welcome to unmute your microphone so that you can ask questions. I think, Walter, you prefer to be interrupted with questions than have people wait till the end, right?
I would prefer that. Can you,
Yeah.
can you hear me okay today, John?
I can, yeah, can hear you great.
Okay,
Okay,
awesome.
well,
Okay.
let's get started then. Welcome back. This is our, what is it, March? This is our monthly client webinar series, Understanding Your Financials. And this month, we are again joined by Walter Lynn, our accounting mentor and somewhat fearless leader, who is going to walk us through some things relating to turnover in our businesses. And there are going to be a few different directions that we go with this, but I'm going to let him get started, and I think a lot of that will become pretty clear. If you, again, please interrupt with questions, comments as we go, and then we can have some discussion at the end. But please don't save stuff. It's usually easier to deal with them as we go. So with that, Walter, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. It's really great to have everyone on here today. And what I want to talk about is some of the drivers that are in our businesses. And what we've done here today is several of you have maybe grow yards you're involved in either your selling services or your buying services from one. And this is going to have a little bit of flavor toward one enterprise that would be part of a specific operation. So what I'll do here is let me get the spreadsheet up, and we will start to have a little conversation.
Somebody's in the
wind. Got some turbulence.
Walter's airplane is experiencing difficulty. Huh?
Yeah, no.
All right. And let me give a bit of a preface. This is going to be fairly focused on custom feeding, custom grazing enterprises. We are running a number of situations that don't actually have a custom feeding operation, but they may be feeding their own cattle, and we break it into two separate enterprises, track the profit that's produced by the feeding or the grazing itself, and then the profit that is produced by ownership. And the case that we're going to look at today, we actually have done that break apart. They do some custom feeding, but you'll notice that we charge custom feeding, custom grazing rates to cattle that are owned by the same enterprise. We can talk more about that bit, but I just want to make sure we understand that from the beginning.
There we go.
Here we come. It's literally a question I'm going to ask.
Daniel has to answer this question. Right?
Yeah. That question is for all our Google Sheets users, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
This guy impressed me.
Okay. What I guess I want to do, I think this operation has, I think, about 5 or 6 different classes or enterprises. And what it did here is picked the custom feeding operation in the process here. Okay.
Can we make this bigger, Walter?
Yeah, just wait a minute.
Okay.
Let me know when is this going to be about? Will that work, John?
That's great for me. Does that work for everybody else? Speak up if you can't see it. Love it. Okay.
Okay. So, the with the team that's involved with this operation has, very, which is based on some of the coaching that we've done with with John and Daniel and Jordy and everybody. They've got a very short and concise income statement. So the in the in the P&L for the custom feeding operation, there's only one, two, three, four, five accounts. Now, John, you want to maybe talk a little bit more about why you do the brevity?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I have an attention span of a wet gnat on a cold day. And so if I can see, and I learned this from Walter, if I can see the P&L on one side of one sheet of paper, I can get a 30,000 foot view very quickly. Our goal is to keep this short so that you can get an overview, and then all of this is backed by a lot of details. So the idea is to have a summary on the top and then be able to drill down and get more details. So if we see a problem or we have a question, then we drill down. But the first thing we do is look at the whole picture. And in my mind, the income statement gives us a good, quick, maybe 20 to 30,000 foot view. And then if we see places we want to dig in, we go behind the P&L. We see cases where people come to us with $100,000 business that has a 4-page P&L. I look at financial statements all the time, Walter. I know you do too. It is almost impossible to figure anything out about a business with a 4-page P&L quickly. It requires a bunch of work to sort of make it meaningful, and our goal is to have it meaningful right from the beginning. Walter, you've highlighted the top of the first page of the P&L as we do it, and again, I think if you believe in the 80-20 rule, 80% of the value we produce comes in the gross margin by enterprise. That is at the, basically the top third of our front page of our P&L.
Right. So, so what we did is I just printed out just the custom feeding enterprise class that's in QuickBooks, for the reports that you see. So let me give you an example here of the drill down that we can do. So if I highlight this 312,000, and I don't ever like to use red because John does not like to work on ranches that have losses. Is that right, John?
Yeah, that is correct. We can start there, but we're not going to finish there.
That's correct. So just think about the 312 a second. Okay, so I just highlighted that in green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back to the sales by the sales by items. And if you'll notice here, and let me get this one so that you can see it too. This is the drill down that John is talking about. Okay. And what we're seeing here is that this particular operation is basically they have external customers and internal customers. Well, the 312 is actually what they sold to themselves, in other enterprises. Okay. And is there anything you want to add on with that, John?
Yeah, so just to be clear here, the internal, these people also own stockers and cow-calf. And they invoice themselves. We invoice them. We make a dummy invoice from the custom feeding, custom grazing enterprise over to the cow-calf enterprise. So this is essentially just as though they were paying someone else to take care of their cattle. They're just paying themselves. And as I mentioned before, the important thing here is we're trying to distinguish or disentangle the profit that comes from ownership versus the profit that comes from operation.
Right, right. So one of the things I've highlighted several items on this item report. And one of the things that and that's what I have here in yellow, just for comparison, so that we can actually start to think about some of the things that are going on here. As you can see, when they're doing custom graze, one's $1.04 and one's $1.06. I'd say that's pretty close for Joe Biden type work. Okay.
All right, hold on.
And
We're not doing, that's not the type of work we're doing. Our new motto that we suck less than you at accounting is that we're not going that far.
yeah, we'll try to stay out of California today. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
All right. And another piece here is, let's look at the yardage. 55 and 55. Very, very consistent. So one of the pieces that is interesting here is, I didn't highlight this one, but John and I were chatting earlier in the day, and we were thinking, well, what's going on here? Because you'll see something here a little bit later, in that there's some differences in the cost here. So what we're looking at is one's $1.75 and one's $1.40. So that's one thing that we want to make sure, we're trying to make sure if that makes sense in this particular operation. You have anything you want to add there, John?
Yeah, the biggest thing is we want to remember that the fed feed in this is a mix of supplement fed to cows on pasture and then feed fed in the yard, or a full feed situation. And my guess here, we have not drilled all the way through this, but my guess is the lower cost of the fed feed in the owned cattle is because a higher percentage of those are actually on pasture, just being supplemented.
Right. Right.
And so one of the things we talked about earlier today is breaking that fed feed into two separate categories. One that is, basically a full feed fed feed, and then the other is a feed fed on pasture, a supplemental feed.
Right. Well, and another piece of this for some of the team members that are on John's team is that we want to make sure that, as I pointed out, this 312, it ties back to something that is in our P&L, and so does the 151. So, but the other part of this is that we want to also make sure that, when you start, I've got a spreadsheet, I don't have it on here today, is that, I've got this 168 spread out by month, the whole 151 and the 312, I've got it spread out by month so that we can actually see if there's any inconsistencies. In what we're seeing, maybe they put it in by head when they should have done days or whatever. So anyway, we got to
tons.
What's that?
Or pounds versus tons. Sometimes we get confused about our units.
And the moral of that story is we want to be consistent in how we look at it. Okay. So, but I wanted to highlight those 6 items. The most of this is, it's just additional service type stuff. Except, in here on, the vet and whatever. But anyway, we'll talk about how we looked at that on the P&L by the enterprise. Is there any questions on this particular report?
Yeah.
Was there a question?
Question there? I think we're good. Keep going.
Okay, thank you, John.
And again,
So,
please interrupt if you have a question.
so what we did here was we looked at how much of the I broke down the billing, into basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pots. Grazing, yardage, feed, vet, and then kind of the other ancillary type stuff that was going on. Okay, and so and then then it was feed and vet.
I can put it over, I can stick it right here.
Hang on 1 second. Sorry, Tammy. All right, go ahead.
Right. So so as you can see, this 312 is for the internal piece of the operation, and the 151 was for the external piece of the operation. And then there was I counted it as an inventory purchase because I think there had to be I think there was a settlement on it looked like a dead critter, in this particular operation that was on the for the external customers. So as you can see, this 461 between the external and the internal is the same number that's over here. Okay, now let me make this just a tad bigger. Okay, so are we on the same sheet of music so far, John?
I think so. Any questions about this? So again, what you're looking at, the custom feeding column, or the column B, would be one of the enterprises off our, our standard multi-enterprise P&L. And then everything to the right of that, grazing, yardage, feed, vet, those are, the exploded out numbers, if you will. If you clicked on that number in QuickBooks, you would essentially see the numbers that comprise the numbers that go on the columns to the right.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So then the 167, I put it in feed and I put it in vet, but then I broke it out over here. I mean, you can see that now if I go down here just a little bit, I got some percentages, but 75% of the feed, when you look at I mean, this is a ratio of 75 20 24, so we split the billing between external and internal 75 24 or 76 24, in the process. But I think John, as we chatted, we probably want to maybe think about, on the item side of actually looking at working through what is fed in the lot versus fed in the fed on in a pasture situation. Okay, and then on the vet bill, what we did was we did a similar deal, and 65% was attributed to internal, and 35% was attributed to external. So, and then what we did is, well, let's first a figure gross gross margin for each enterprise. And so one comes in at 70 and one comes in at 57. So John, would you want to have anything you want to weigh in on that?
Okay, it's a couple of things quickly. The first one is there's a bit of that's going to be data entry error. We probably got some units incorrect there. And then I think the separation between the grazed supplement versus fed feed, but I actually expect that to be the reverse, not higher. So I don't know that I have meaningful comment on that, other than that in my mind means we have some cleanup work to do in the data that probably has to do with the way the
Right.
quantities are entered.
I mean, but I think that the big quantities, I think we're probably pretty close, John.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that.
So, I mean,
I
overall,
think
we
on the
were,
overall, we're in the ballpark, right?
yeah, we're at 61%.
Now I'm going to tell you, for the custom feeding operations that we look at, 61%, and this is a very feed intensive situation. The majority of the revenue is coming from fed feed. That's a pretty high gross margin.
Right.
I'm impressed with a gross margin in a custom feeding operation that is 50% or above. And we almost hit a grazing number there. Now, again, there is revenue that comes from grazing, so it is a bit of a blend.
Right.
But again, if you took the average of 57 and 69 and said it was in the low 60s, to my mind, for a confined feeding operation, that is a very good number.
Right. Oh, okay. So, but I just wanted to do the overall versus how it was broken out. Okay. So then I looked at this is one of the a little bit of an aha. When you looked at the external and internal yardage charges, there were basically 44,000 days billed and 151,000 days billed internally, for a total of 195,000. Now, John shared with me that this is 365,000 or 1,000 head unit. So 1,000 times 365, or it's 365,000. So what we're seeing there is we're running a tick, over 50, 53% is of capacity. So, the question is this something that fits their goal? Does this fit their context? Do they want to take 3 months worth of vacation? So, I mean, there's a lot of questions that John and I were raising on that. Do you have anything you want to add there, John?
Yeah, I want to add two things. The 365 is actually the yard only. And so that 53 number is actually in reality is lower than that. I don't have the total of the grazing to sort of give us today, but imagine that number is probably closer to 500,000, and that occupancy is closer to 50% or 40%. One thing that we can use a comparable industry here, the hotel business profitability is driven almost entirely by occupancy rate. And what you imagine is if you have a yard that is only operating, as we've shown it here, only operating 6 months of the year, your overhead costs accumulate for 12 months, right? If you shut the yard down, you eliminate the direct costs, but you don't eliminate the overheads. If you were to run this same yard again, with a good gross margin or with a similar gross margin, but run it for, let's say, 10 months or 300 days, you would have a much higher occupancy rate, and that makes covering your overheads much easier. There are also reasons in this part of the country where sometimes running during the not ideal months is a very good decision, because your gross margin can actually go up because your cost of feed will go down. So if you have access to wet distillers and some of those things, sometimes feed in the summer is very cheap. Nobody really wants to operate a feed yard during the extreme hot months of the summer. That's not the most pleasant situation. But if you can get that occupancy number significantly higher, then your total operating margin goes up.
And another piece of this, John and I were involved a couple months back on an operation that had changed locations. And they were, similar. They had a custom feeding operation too. and we were going through some of the numbers, and what we were finding was, I mean, the numbers were respectable, but then something was said. I mean, then they were not making the progress that they thought that they should financially. Well, what had happened when they changed locations, they were, I think, they were only operating, was it 7 out of 12? Wasn't that right, John?
It was like 4.5 out of 12.
Right.
So occupancy was
Well,
much closer to 30% than 50%.
right. So they were, I mean, mentally, they were trying to, we were looking at their debt coverage ratio, and we were looking at their working capital, and we were raising concerns. But then when we started looking at what the possibility was for the next year, it was like, you know,
Totally different number.
yeah, it was a totally different number. The Red Sea parted, or whatever you wanted to say. And so anyway, so what I'm getting at, this turnover and gross margin are very key things that we need to watch in our businesses, because I mean that was one, when we started delving and digging in and getting the spades out and digging a little bit. It was a different, I mean, it was a different conversation after we did that. So and so anyway, I thought that was a pretty special example that I wanted to share here with you today.
Gave them a much better outlook for the coming year, right? Because basically you could triple the gross income just by increasing the occupancy.
Right.
Let me,
Right.
are you gonna go into margins versus animal days, I assume, or markup versus animal days?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I did, these were both from, I mean, all four of these numbers, they come from the sales by product, service, or the item report. And so when we looked at the units here, 109,000 basically days, externally, and 225 internally. So as you can see, the revenue is very, very tight per unit. So $1.37 versus $1.39. And then when we looked at the expenses, it was 41 and 60. But what we're looking at is, I mean, I think some of this is, there's more units going this way, et cetera. So that, I mean, that brings, that changes this part of it, in the process. But then when we look at, how much is the feed and how much is the, under both scenarios, one's 37 and one's 56. I mean, the vet's real, is within a penny. So, what we're doing here is we're really watching, we're trying to make sure that these margins, make sense in the process. Because, I mean, I think lots of times we have a tendency, when we have a grow situation, a custom feeding deal, we're just looking at the process of just looking at it from just markup only, when we need to be thinking about the components. And another piece of this is, I didn't put these in here, but I will, John, just for the sake of argument. See the feed business here, when they marked it up and sold it to the other enterprises, it's really 6%.
Now, I'm just going to
And-
tell you that the feed markup they used to calculate their feed price was higher than 6%. So it doesn't always, the way you calculate it, you know, sort of when you're billing isn't always the way it turns out in the end.
Well, my question to you, John, is I didn't see an inventory adjustment for, you know, was there some feed on hand?
There is, but we've left that on the balance sheet.
Well, I know, but if you left it on the balance sheet, there was no change.
No change in the P and
Yeah, it
L.
should have been a change in the balance. There should have been a change on the
Correct.
P and
Yeah, well, okay, we had did a change on the balance sheet, but did not. I'd have to look at that. The difference should be the fed feed.
Okay, yeah, but
So we,
anyway,
you know, if we started with 500 and ended with 200, then we've, you know, fed 300 onto the P and L.
right. Yeah, but anyway, that's you know, something's not jiving there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And this is a place where we're still are having problems with tax preparers. So we need to change our system a little bit there.
Right. So, but anyway, this is just one example of you know, some of the drivers in a profit and loss for a custom feeding where the somewhat, you know, mixed parts of the items that we're using for the enterprises. So you know, I thought that we wanted to get to the drivers because I think oftentimes we just look at the, you know, the feed piece, and then are we marking it up enough, et cetera. So I mean, when you look at so I mean we're looking at we don't have I mean, these costs really go against the, you know, this piece over here, so that's why I combined them over here on the right.
Right. And again, everyone talks about their yardage and their markup percentage as though those are the two most important numbers. And this is a case where the occupancy number or the percent of capacity used, it actually becomes the most important driver.
Right.
Hey,
And-
Walter,
and-
I got a question, please. Can you hear me?
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Is the 40 on J23 and K23 that add up to the 195,000? Is that your stock days?
Yes.
Okay, so they had 1,000 head in there for 195 days or something like that. Is that the way to think about that number?
Lost you for a minute there. Repeat the question, Jordan.
Is that like saying they had 1,000 head in there for 195 days or something like
Right.
that?
That's the same thing. Right.
Yep.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
And we have not standardized this to like a standard animal unit or a standard animal day. This is literally just
Yeah,
head
one-
days.
One head, and then the 139,000 is also head days, but that's out on pasture.
That's
Correct.
correct.
So the capacity you're looking at is filling the feedlot all year round. And then
Correct.
the grazing is going to be, I mean, that's going to be limited to what forage grows.
Correct.
Okay,
But if in Kansas, we know it's going to be better, right, Jordy?
right, yeah. Does the
Better than Wyoming.
how do you calculate capacity? The 365,000. Do you jam pack it all year round?
Well, I mean, I think that depends on the goal, and that's a good question because one, okay, if you follow Bud Williams, okay, Bud always wanted to have a balance between feed, animals, and cash,
Right.
right, John?
Yes.
Okay, but if you're in a custom deal, I mean, but you have to look at Bud's context. in what we're looking at, because the lot that he makes that comment out of is that VT Feeders that's in northern Alberta, right, John?
Yes.
So that was an owned scenario, correct, John?
Yep.
Where here we're not, well, I didn't, well, I mean, one of the things I guess you could do is, let's just look at this just a second. Come on here.
You gotta have 5 in there.
Yeah, I think it's L23, not 235.
Must be the Mac keyboard.
Ah,
Good one, Jordan. That was excellent. Bonus points for Jordan for getting the Mac. You're interested in VT Feeders is where Bud spent a lot of time in Lloydminster, Alberta. There you go.
that's going to come back 100. I need to change this to J.
There we go.
There we go. So, I mean, that's a piece of context right there, right, guys?
Yep. So let me highlight that a little bit. So if you're fully custom running outside cattle, to my mind, running at or close to capacity is dictated by your ability to do that sustainably, right? How often you need to clean your yards. There are, a number of things there. The reason why I would propose that in a more owned situation, you want to run at a lower capacity is because you are looking for those really high profit opportunities that show up, and you want to have cash and pen space available to take advantage of those when they appear.
Yeah, and that's where I was going. That's right,
Yeah.
John. And because Bud, his deal was, I mean, if you looked at this one right here, Jordan, you with me?
Yes.
He wanted to keep that in the 65-ish range is the number I remember. Is that the number that you remember, John?
I think so. That sounds right.
Right. Okay. So, but anyway, I just think that's, I mean, each of us, it's back to the context of, what we want to, what we want to shoot for.
Yeah.
Because see here, if you say, well, I only want to do it, 270 days, I'm going to take some time off or whatever. See, that's another, so then your capacity, then it's 72%.
Right. So they could,
Oh,
Can't hear you, Jordan.
Oh, is that better?
Yep.
In this ranch's case, they could still, what could they do? They could still almost triple the external days to get to capacity.
Right.
right.
Okay.
And so the impact on cash flow on that, right, when that's a gross margin of almost 70%, that's a pretty good lever.
Right.
Right. So triple your gross income and then keep 70 cents out of every dollar. I'm interested in that change.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, what you're going to do, I mean, if you want, see, then that capacity goes to 70. Yeah, then you're at 75%. See, Jordan.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
And anyone that's run a feed yard knows that sometimes you're at 60 or 70% capacity, and there are days when you're at 125.
That's full, yeah.
Right. Full
Right.
is not necessarily 100% capacity. Full is an interesting number that can vary quite widely.
Right.
But again, just like Walter's talking about, there's a lot in here that depends on what the purpose of this yard is, what your goals are. You know, if you have a lifestyle goal that includes, I want to be out of town for a month and I want a month to clean and repair pens without animals in it, then that's one thing. If you want to run 12 months of the year at 70% capacity, that's a very different operation, right? Where maybe you have an open pen all the time and you're just sort of cleaning through them as you go, welding, etc.
Right. Okay.
Those sorts of things.
So,
But
anyway,
let me tell you this: in custom grazers, seasonal grazers, feed yard operators, sort of need to pay attention to the fact that it is very difficult to pay 12 months worth of bills with 5 months worth of operation. Seasonal grazers who do something very similar, right, and try to earn all at sometimes you are more profitable running 5 months of the year than you are 12 months of the year. But we need to make sure that even if we're very profitable for those 5 months, that we have a plan to get through all 12. And sometimes we slip there in how we think about that.
And would going up to 100% capacity mean lowering your prices and then reducing your profit too? And then
That's right.
Maybe you make more profit at a lower capacity due to higher prices or something. I don't know.
Yep. Very, very good question, because likely if you go higher, if you go more months of the year, you're probably going to cool your margin a little bit.
well, I mean, another piece of this is that, you could be, I mean, another part of this is what if your custom feeding deal was, dairy to, a dairy grow or dairy, I'm going to call it a dairy grow development.
Yeah.
That's a different context too.
And works very well in the heat of the summer.
Right.
Right. And every time I drive around this country and all these ranches, we have some good sized ranches around us that have feed yards, and take two as a perfect example. They're very close to each other, about 10,000 head. One of those yards operates 12 months of the year. The other operates very seasonally. The 12-month one has a big advantage. And they choose to do different things at different times of the year. So sometimes they're developing heifers, sometimes they're actually fattening cattle, sometimes they're just growing cattle. The same yard can be used for multiple activities. And just like when we talk about stacking enterprises out on pasture, it's the same idea. It's actually a lot easier to stack enterprises in a yard.
Another piece of this, which what we're really trying to look at today is turnover, which John made the comment that, we've got some good margin here. Our turnover is could be improved, etc. But I mean, I think another piece of this, as we look at, we've got a gross margin of 283,000 there. What's the labor efficiency with that? And I didn't get into that today, but that's another part of it, because I mean, that's going to be a big piece of our overhead.
Yep.
Okay. So I think that's
Awesome.
all I have today.
Any questions, comments, or thoughts on this? I think one of the next topics we're going to cover. Oh, sorry, Cody, go ahead.
John, just how are you guys coming up with your grazing costs? Is that like an end of the year evaluation that you're doing, or is that kind of on a monthly basis?
You just went to where I was about to tell you we
Okay,
were
sorry.
headed next time. No, that's good. So there are a couple of different things there, and grazing and yardage. I'm going to lump those two together. Walter, I think we've talked about having that discussion next time about actually computing our cost to keep and our cost to carry, right?
Right.
Okay, and so that's one thing. Obviously, those are determined in part, Cody, by market forces, right? So you have a regional grazing cost, a regional yardage norm, that sort of thing. But we can actually go through our P&L and figure out what our costs really are. And we're going to go into that in detail, but I mean, just imagine that you take all of your costs and you divide by that capacity number, and you're going to come pretty darn close to what that is. We'll go through that in more detail. So I hate to put you off on that, but I'm going to put you off on that just a little.
Nope, sounds good. I'll be patient.
All right, sounds good. One thing I think we can agree on, and Walter has even surprised me with his level, but looking at a lot of places that are charging yardage, most people are not increasing their yardage enough. Most people are significantly undercharging for yardage. And that has a lot to do with your profitability also, just like occupancy does. But again, one thing we've seen, I think I've said this a few times in this webinar in months past, is that we've seen the cost of everything that goes into a yardage calculation go up significantly in the last 2 years. And most people have not increased their yardage or have not increased it enough to make up for that. So I think of the components of yardage as, depreciation, fuel, labor, what am I missing? Repairs and maintenance, add on to those types of things, the cost of actually operating that yard. And, fuel has, in let's say a 2 or 3 year period has, doubled. Cost of depreciation has skyrocketed, right? The cost of labor has generally gone up, right? So there really is no cost that we put into our overheads that we use to calculate yardage that hasn't had a pretty significant increase. And, we still see people that are charging 35 cents a day yardage. Now, yardage charges and feed markups can kind of ping pong back and forth against each other, right? What matters often is the total, and that's a marketing decision, how you present the price to your customer. So in some cases, you can have a high yardage and a low feed markup, or you can have a high feed markup and a lower yardage. Again, the dollars per day coming in is what really matters. But make sure that you know what those costs are, so that when you are calculating it, you may choose to adjust how you present it, but you actually know what the underlying numbers are. So, I've had customers in the past that say, you want to charge 45 cents for yardage? That's ridiculous. Some other guy charges me 30%. Well, yeah, but his feed cost is twice what mine is. So, again, part of that is how you present it to a customer, and that's a marketing decision, not a Bud Williams marketing decision, but like just an advertising and customer relation type marketing decision.
I just had a question, John,
You bet.
about opportunity rent. In this case, would that all go to the custom feeding class since everything's coming out of that? Or would you you're not really charging your custom feeding class for grazing, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're doing, in this case, Walter's just looking at the gross margin. And so we are doing that in the overheads on the P&L if we're doing it. So that's a good question. And there may be a reason to bring that up and include it when we're doing an analysis like this. But if I'm doing that through the overheads, then it's going to show up in the ingredients of the yardage.
Okay.
Does that
Yep,
make sense?
that's a good point. Yep.
Okay. What else?
John, if we've been going through our enterprises this week, but we've been using Google Sheets. Does this transfer to QuickBooks? Would Google Sheets transfer to QuickBooks?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Walter's going to say yes, and Daniel's going to say yes. I'm going to say no, but they're correct. I'm anti-Google.
Yeah, one of the things there's a little bit, let me share something here with you. just to kind of, sometimes I don't want you to get frustrated like I did. Okay, but if you look at this column right here, okay, you know, when you look here, this is kind of a lock deal, because I'm gonna probably eat crow here on something, but I am. But anyway, sometimes when you dump reports out, you might want to think about going and in the column that you're in, let's say like right here. Okay, you might want to think about using this text to columns deal so that you don't have, it doesn't come out. I mean, when you do that, you can actually manipulate the data, and because like these prices here, they were about 7 digits long and all that. I mean, 7 to the right of the decimal point.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but you got to use this text to columns to actually clean that up. So anyway, I shared that with John today. Okay, so
Yeah,
I
and
just want
the other thing to think about, you want to be very careful, and this is both from QuickBooks to either Excel or Google Sheets, and then between Excel and Google Sheets, you will very regularly lose formulas.
Mhm.
And so you want to pay a lot of attention to that. That's the reason I'm anti Google Sheets, is because then when I bring a Google Sheet into Excel, I lose all the formulas, and then everything becomes dumb. QuickBooks Online does a mix when they export, and you want to check which it is, but some reports will come out of QuickBooks with the formulas intact, and many of them come out dumb. And I'm not sure why they haven't updated that yet. It seemed like they were making progress on that, and then it's gone backwards.
right.
So when you do the, like in the, you know, the sum totals or the you've got the number of units times the price to get to the final total, the multiplication function will actually be lost there a lot of the time.
Yeah, because see, like here, that there's no that. I mean, that's
It's a
not
number. It's not a calculation. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So
Or
when you go through and make changes and look at different things, you'll lose all that data.
and see, like here, where the average price, see, that's a number also. And see here, this is the way it came out of QBO to start with. I mean, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decimals. We don't need it that much. So, all right. Well, I will let you guys have an awesome day.
You bet. Well, thank you, Walter. I really appreciate it. Thank you all who joined us. We are going to be doing this about the same time again, about the 3rd Thursday of next month. And next month, Cody, as you asked, we're going to talk more about the details of calculating yardage and using our overhead numbers to figure out, what our cost to carry is. So look forward to that in about 30 days. So thanks again, Walter. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the rest of you for being here, and we will talk soon. And I need to
Okay,
stop
have a great one.
You bet. I need to stop my recording.